first of all, this has been a long time coming. I've created this content and done it privately a few different times. Um, I spent a lot of time reworking it, rewriting it, and stewing over how to make this valuable and what can I give the world that's new, what hasn't already been covered, and is organizations like Black Hills, Infosec, Red Siege, Secure Ideas, and a bunch of other organizations that I respect that have talked about a lot of these things before. And so I feel like I don't have a lot of new content to give, but what I do have is my own um, insights into how I've been able to do this to my advantage from a blue team perspective as a defender. I've had the opportunity to get to build some great teams. Um, they all know who they are, and I miss you all. Um, and I've learned things the hard way over a long time. I came up the ranks through sysadmin side of IT, from the servers, network, storage, everything of the sort, keeping every organization up and running. And every organization that I've worked for or with as a consultant or as an employee has had problems that could be addressed by this webinar. And, I think that the world has problems and we have logical ways to make those problems a little smaller. And I think those making it smaller starts with going back to some of the basics. So there's a lot of organizations that try to buy their way out of the problem, but they're not doing it in ways that actually solve the problem. They're adding one more thing to manage. This is what we're going to talk about today. And, this is purposely incomplete. You can't fix the entire world in just 1 hour. But I think that we can make it a little bit better. When we start talking about the problem of cybersecurity, I think one of the problems that we have is initial access, root point of compromise, and starting, where do adversaries get their hooks into our environment? Where do they start? Um, you know, from an initial access problem, one of the articles, I put the link below. This is really where it started for me, is understanding that this is a logical sequence of events that happen. Um, you know, at the heart of every incident, it all starts here. And whether it's exploiting something on the edge, a vulnerability, abusing remote access, getting malicious code execution on an endpoint, implanting malicious devices, or compromising a partner. Um, there's only so many ways for the disaster to start. And, you know, every single organization that I've ever worked for pays people all day long to use the internet and to click on things in email. And, every organization that I've worked for also does phishing training and social engineering testing. And that's all centered around training the people that work for the organization not to click on stuff. And that's their whole job, is to click on stuff. We can do a little bit of learning. We can learn to slow down through the know before testing and all of that kind of stuff. We can learn to think about why we're being asked to act. We can hover over those links to look if it's legitimate. We can verify the sender is known and is relevant to a previous communication. But this doesn't account for even most of the problem. I mean, we have CDN networks where the URL is obscured and we don't know. It's coming through Amazon's AWS. It's coming through Microsoft. It's coming through Cloudflare, wherever the CDN network is being distributed from. We don't know if a random string of numbers is legitimate or not. It might be, based on how the internet has changed and has been working on us for the last decade. We also have layered documents and container files and all these things that, the initial attachment might not be malicious, but there might be something layered underneath it. And what happens if that legitimate sender account is compromised? What if the person sending the email has their account compromised, or the sending domain has their entire email tenant compromised. I used to run cybersecurity for a fairly large regional bank, and that was some of the largest issues that we had to deal with was vendor payment fraud against our clients, where they were working with an organization that had their email compromised. They had the full email trail of everything. They had that conversation history, and they were using that in order to manipulate people into doing bad things. So I think we need to start focusing in less about phishing training and social engineering. Stop believing that's actually going to protecting us. Um, let's. How do we provide a safe place for our employees? How do we make it so when they click on something, they don't wreck everything? If someone clicking on an email or visiting a website can ruin your entire day or your entire network or destroy your business, your network sucks. The adversary really has three things they can do through email. They can try to build relationship and trust to get actions to be taken. They can execute their code. They can get you to visit a website, um, to trick you into providing sensitive information or credentials. I mean, it's all about either trust, executing something, or getting you to expose private information. So what are you going to do to limit that blast radius around bad things happening through email? How do you create that safe place for all of our people to be productive and not worry, is this a phishing test that I'm going to fail, or am I actually going to wreck everything? And we have another problem. We also pay people to answer the phones, and things like the casino breaches of recent memory, where people were social engineered through phone calls and got in through that way. We also know that there's tech support scams where people will talk you through connecting to Quick Assist inside of your organization, and sharing your environment that way to the malicious actor. We also know that they get us to copy and paste commands and execute things in the Windows key R, the run box on our systems. And do our users know about this kind of stuff? And even if they know about that kind of stuff, what are we doing to help prevent that from our side, from the sysadmin side? This is something that is just keeps getting bad, and everything is not fine. You know, when I think about incidents, we need a lot more focus around the protect, detect, and respond to stay out of the recover side of things. The easy answer seems like we should just hire a managed services provider or buy a new thing to protect us, to solve all of our problems for us. Except, you know, you probably haven't done a lot to make your systems less vulnerable. if if you still have all those same vulnerabilities, all those misconfigurations, all those weaknesses, you're giving that managed services provider or that new vendor or that new product an unreasonable task to protect against every attack ever. The same problem exists, that existed before, and now you might have just increased your attack surface. And so how do we start taking away those options for abuse, those options that can be taken advantage of, and allow that managed service provider or allow that next new vendor or that new product that you just put in to be successful? How do we actually make the problem smaller so those things that we're buying can work better? You know, there's a lot of organizations that I've worked for and with that depend completely on EDR and email filtering. But EDR has problems, and literally there are books on evading EDR. And this is not an advertisement for Red Siege, even though I love them. There's courses for evading EDR. Um, this is a real thing. EDRs have problems. They still have to allow the system to perform. They can't impact performance. I mean, that's part of the golden rule of EDR. They also have to have system stability. They have to minimize false positives. They have to still maintain your ability to use the system. And all of that stuff is counter to stopping the bad stuff from running in your environment. Your EDR is going to fail to prevent malicious code from executing. Your network firewall is going to fail to keep out adversaries. Your email filter is going to fail to prevent your users from getting phished or malicious attachments. All these things are important, but they're not perfect. Vendors have to make their solutions, their EDR environments, or their phishing platforms, or their email filtering platforms. They have to work across their entire customer base. They have to do standardized rule sets to make this scalable. They can't have their entire triage teams being overwhelmed by alerts. So without your knowledge, or with your knowledge, they're making trade-offs to allow themselves to scale their teams. And it isn't meant to be bad. This is meant to just be the truth. They're making these decisions based on their ability to support you, not whether it's in your best interest as you being unique from every other client that they may have. And I heard once that we need to include a MITRE ATT&CK slide in every single presentation that we do. This is my MITRE ATT&CK slide. Again, this is not a bingo card. We're not trying to fill it out. But it's important to realize that there are different phases of the attack inside of the attack chain. The bad actor can't just jump to the end. They can't just jump to the impact, to the disaster moment. There are only so many ways to get initial access to your systems. There's only so many ways to execute malicious code. And, attackers have goals too. They don't want to re-break into your system every time your computer restarts. They want to have that persistence mechanism. They need to be able to remote control that system from somewhere else on the internet because they're not right beside you. They need to be able to discover things about your environment that's different than everybody else's. How do they make that next hop? I've just seen a Discord OSA model showing up today. No OSI model today. No OSA model will be discussed by me ever, now, and in the future. So no OSI model. There are things that make everything unique about your environment. You have different gateways, different IP address schemes, different password policies, different lockout policies, different things that are protecting your environment. And in order for the adversary to make the next step, they need to be able to discover these things and then move laterally. They don't have magic. There is a logical sequence of events leading to the bad actor winning. And we don't have to be perfect in detecting every phase of the attack, but we do need to be good enough in enough of these phases to give us confidence that we can stop and disrupt the attack before that disaster moment happens. Certain phases are really, really hard. C2 detection, really, really hard. Data exfil could be really, really hard in some environments. But privilege escalation, lateral movement, persistence, discovery, these are all areas where we can win. When we start thinking about how do we reduce the attack surface, how do we become the least preferred target? Security defaults invite attacks against the defaults. Default settings only catch attacks that are default. Adversaries bet on your network being messed up and ignored in the normal way. What happens if it's messed up in ways they couldn't ever imagine? You can customize those controls to your environment. Those normal attacks are going to stop working. You get to introduce them to the wet heat of the hot fog of despair. This is how we increase the timeline of attack, taking away options, making it harder to move between the different phases of the attack. The more we lengthen the period of time between initial access and disaster, the more time we have to detect or prevent that adversary from doing what they need to do. This is where the battle is won or lost. This is who determines whether you get to be that legend or whether you become that cautionary tale. And there's costs associated with being the adversary too. This isn't all about costs associated with being the defender. There's costs associated with being with the adversary. They have development time. They have infrastructure. They are in the business to turn your breach or your compromise into money. If you can create a situation where they're normal tactics and techniques and procedures don't work, they need to spend more time, more energy, more money, more resources to continue to focus in on you. You get to separate that opportunistic attack from that focused adversary. If defending your system burns their infrastructure and every other security tool and gets them deny listed everywhere else, they have to tear down and rebuild. They have to retool. And organized crime has resources constraints too. So they have a seemingly endless list of victims. Becoming the harder target is what takes to move you to the end of the list or become more than what most adversaries are willing to deal with. So today we're going to focus in on protecting less stuff. You know, what happens if there's less to attack? Well, there's less to defend. There is no science experiment that I can think of that benefits from having more variables. Our job as defenders is to remove variables by reducing that attack surface, simplifying, automating what we can. We don't have to fight fair. These are our systems, and we don't have to tell anybody that we changed the rules. You know, when we take away options from the adversary, we get to force them into making bad decisions. The more decisions that a person is forced to make, the more chances they have for getting that decision wrong. Wrong decisions are noisy. So how do we take away options and force them to make bad decisions? We can give ourselves the advantage. Just because computers are designed to do nearly everything for anyone doesn't mean that we need to do that for our people to support our business. We can take away things. We can force those decision points. Defenders don't need to be right every single time. We can create that situation where the adversary has to be right every time. Every attack that I can think of in my entire life that I can think of involves some element of identity abuse, communications, of process execution, whether it's cloud-based or on-premise. It's always in the context of some sort of identity. There's always an element of communication, whether it's internal to your environment or external through C2. There's always the element of process execution, whether it's living off the land with stuff that's already there, whether they're bringing their own malicious code. There is an unlimited supply of things that we can do to protect our environment. There's an unlimited supply of things that all of us do not know uniquely. But we can start with what we do know and build from there and build that confidence based on the rules that we are creating. What are the attackers actually doing? Have we looked at malware analysis reports? Are we reading ransomware analysis reports? Are we doing offensive testing? Are we staying current with the current pulse of attack trends? Are we learning from other people's disasters so we don't have to repeat them ourselves? Speaking of identity, so let's jump into identity. You know, I spun up a server 2019 fresh Active Directory domain and accepted all the defaults. And then I ran Ping Castle against my environment. The defaults suck when we start looking at identity services, Active Directory on premises, or we start looking at Azure AD. I'm focused in on Active Directory in this talk, but the same stuff applies evenly against Okta, against Active Directory, against Entra ID. There's security weaknesses built in the defaults. And right here, I see awful things. I see NTLM version 1. I see service counts that don't support AES, scripting extensions. We have it's not on the list, but it's, LLMR. We're still not disabling LLMNR in 2019 or newer in Active Directory in the base domain controller policy. All of these things, NTLM version 1, SMB signing, LDAP signing, all of this stuff that's there from default. I had the opportunity because I'm old to start off my adventure with Active Directory on Windows 2000 Beta 3. And it's been an adventure since that time. And there's been some sprinkling of NetWare in between that in the early days and Active Directory since that time. We've all inherited stuff from the past in Active Directory. One of the biggest problems with Active Directory is it survives. It can't be killed. It will be here forever. And we most likely most of us on this video today um, didn't create the original Active Directory domain. Somebody else had a good idea of, through trial and error, through one try and no errors, fixing a problem by just opening us up to everything through group policy. It happens. It is what it is. So this talk started out being a list of don't do all these bad things. I don't like lists, and they don't survive um, new events, new vulnerabilities that are coming out. So I would like everybody environment in their AD environment to look at, well, let's look at a tool that can actually keep up with what the current attack surface is, that can help us do 80% of the effort in 20% of the time to understand where are our weaknesses, what can be abused from an adversary perspective, from our identity system. So use a pink castle, use Purple Knight, use these other tools that are involved in identifying those weaknesses inside of our environments. We also have a few other GitHub projects. So Active Directory. So if you have Active Directory, most likely you have Active Directory certificate services. Somebody 5 years ago or 10 years ago created ADCS in your environment and then introduced really, really cool ways for the adversaries to get domain admin over your environment in like 5 minutes. So run Locksmith from Trimark, run Script Sentry, run AD Delegator. I can't say that right. Run Bloodhound. Find the opportunities to move throughout your environment without you knowing about it. Remove these ways of being able to abuse your environment. The adversary is going to use weak protocols, misconfigurations in AD and group policy and the related systems, whether it be Active Directory certificate services, your SQL environment, if you still, God forbid, have Exchange on premise, they're going to use your SCCM environment against you and really use all of this stuff to capture, coerce, relay, poison, replay, getting credentials or protocol abuse to take over your environment, become the admin in your environment that you don't know about it. I see a comment, allow any. Yeah, exactly. Through trial and error, by one try, no errors, I added domain users to the local admin group on every workstation, and suddenly all of my problems went away. You need to find these before the adversary does and respond. Take care of all of these things. These are the easy options. So in Active Directory, when you join a computer to actually, even when you start Active Directory, just as a whole, um, it creates something called the pre-Windows 2000 compatible access group inside of your domain. And then it adds the authenticated users group directly to that group. This has full read access for every object inside of your Active Directory domain. So, there are unsafe defaults even hidden below the covers. I think this is identified inside of the Pink Castle report. But keep it in mind that we're oversharing. We're telling everybody everything. The other thing that we need to do is run the netcease GitHub scripts against all of our workstations and domain controllers to disable the net session enumeration. This isn't going to solve everything from an enumeration side of things and getting access to data from a non-privileged user inside of Active Directory, but it's going to help. It's going to clean up what be able to look up who's logged into systems. It's going to prevent access to some of the group enumeration. It's going to prevent access to some of the fields within LDAP for every user account, group account. It's not perfect, but it does help, and it starts to limit the scope of what adversaries can ask directly through asking against NTLM. Um, there's a lot of stuff that it cuts out. The other thing is when we add the very first computer to our domain or any other computer after the fact, authenticated users are part of the users group on every single computer. So unless you're doing workstation to workstation firewalling, authenticated users have the ability to do actions against every single computer in your entire domain, including your servers. This isn't limited to just computer devices. There's very little distinction between servers and workstations. It's just another operating system. And so anything that's not a domain controller is going to have domain users as part of your users group. So any user in your domain that's part of domain users is going to be part of the users group on every single device outside of your domain controllers inside of your environment. This may not need to be the case. We also have the ability to, if run as type commands are a concern for you, so elevated privileges. So a adversary gets access to a low privilege user. They elevate to a user that has more rights on that device, and they start running run as. We can disable the secondary logon service, which supports run as. We can just take away the ability to elevate through run as on each endpoint. And then we can force truly one identity on the endpoints. There's something to test, something you can do in some environments. Sometimes you can't, depending on your uh, ability to support them through whatever help desk tool you're using, but it's something to keep in mind. You can disable that secondary login. You also have, either through local policy or group policy, the ability to deny access, either through service counts locally or over the network. So we can deny interactive login by denying that deny log on locally setting, either through group policy or through local policy for our service accounts. We could still let them run as service accounts, but if on the endpoint, if that identity for the service account is compromised through privilege escalation, we can disallow their ability to log in interactively. We can limit the ability to use that as other things. We can also limit the ability for that service account to connect to other workstations or servers. Maybe that service account only needs to run locally on that device in the context of the process it's running, contact the cloud account, but it doesn't need to access anything over the network. We can just stop that service account. We can neuter it. We can keep it from being able to connect to anything over the network, and we can stop it from being able to be elevated and run additional controls or additional processes through secondary login, and we can stop it from being able to use for interactive login, console login into that device. We have that ability. We also know, and credit to Bushido token, that there's known things that are out there from a process execution side of things that are being advantage or being abused right now by ransomware actors. You know, I have a lot to say about all this, but one of the things that we need to do is just stop the lists of bad things. So if you are using, or if you're not using any of the tools, the reference on this site, I'd take a serious look and see if anything is running in your environment, and then figure out how you're going to be blocking it. back up a couple slides here. In the context of identity, I just want to talk about one more thing. When we start talking about access inside of our environments, not every user needs to be able to access or log into every single thing. We also need to talk about things like segregating our authentication domains. Start talking about, should our users on our laptops be able to access every single server? Within those laptops, segregating who can admin them. So workstation admins need to be separated out from server admins, need to be separated out from domain admins. And what I mean by that is it's whether you're using things like credential guard or other things to protect those local admin or the credential storing on devices. Credential harvesting and credential caching is still a real thing. And depending on whether you have enterprise edition or non-enterprise edition of Windows, it affects your ability to protect some of these things. If Jan gets compromised in this scenario, we don't want the local admin or the workstation admin that logged into that to suddenly be able to use that as a lateral movement technique to get into server 2, server 1, or the domain controller. Workstation admins should not have administrative credential or administrative control over your servers. They shouldn't be able to administer group policy through a domain admin role on your domain controller. We want to prevent and provide lines in the sand where things shouldn't be able to log into. So we can, through group policy, we can limit where our server admins can log into. We can explicitly deny the server admins group from being able to log into workstations. They need to access servers from a privileged access workstation. Their credentials can't ever be exposed on a laptop because they can't log into them. Same thing with workstation admins. We can deny their ability to log into servers and stop that line in the sand where even if a workstation admin credential is compromised, it can only be used on a workstation or a laptop. Same with server admins. Most server admins should not have the rights to be a full admin in your domain. Taking care of servers, taking care of applications doesn't always mean that you need to be being able to modify sites and services or group policy objects or DNS or other things on your domain controllers. Let's draw that line in the sand as well. So if those credentials become compromised, again, they can't be used to spread across our workstations. They can't be used to take full admin control over your domain controllers. Least privilege and splitting out those roles where appropriate. At least draw the line around workstation admin away from everything else in your infrastructure at a minimum. Okay. When we start talking about execution, talking about all this stuff, what's allowed to run inside of our environments? Everything has to happen within the context of an identity, and then it has to do something within that identity. It has to execute, it has to communicate over the network or over the internet. And when we start talking about execution, well, we have free stuff, and nothing that I've talked about so far has been paid, has been expensive. This is all free stuff that is available to us. And when we start talking about application allow listing, we have 2 ways of doing application allow listing inside of Windows for free. We have WDAC, so the Windows Defender Application Control, and we have App Blocker. App Blocker, I find a little bit easier for us to step into, and then we can take those policies and move them over to WDAC if we need to start moving into a more advanced environment. When we start talking about App Blocker and application allow listing, well, this isn't an all or nothing thing. Application allow listing is one of those very, very difficult things, or it can be if you let it spiral out of control. Our goal with application allow listing is to start small. We can do this in audit mode. We can watch what's happening inside of our environment, and we can see what's executing. And then we can generate rules based on all of those different audit logs and understanding of what's actually happening inside of our environment from a process execution side of things. Now, the default rules I've included in here, they suck. So they're a good spot to start, but they should not be the end. The default rules that you generate through AppLocker, by default, don't do anything around live off the land, binaries, and scripts. So we'll get into that in a bit here. But this is about defining location, publisher, executable name, what's allowed to execute inside of your environment. And so what does this look like? So we get event logging around, hey, this was allowed to run. This was blocked by the administrator, prevented from running. We have the ability to define all of this inside of our environment. So when an adversary is trying to execute malicious code inside of your environment, it's dependent on a couple of things. They have to have the ability to write to a location to save a file, to save malicious code to, and then they have to be able to execute it. So first of all, where do they have rights to save things to? So temp files to user profile directories. So app data, C drive users, and then user, and then everything inside of your user context, inside of your user profile. Typically, you have any user low privilege rights has access to be able to write the data to that and be able to execute from that environment. Are we going to let random things being executed from temporary files for your browser? Are we going to allow everything to be executed from other spots inside of your environment where that user might have access to be able to save things to? Or even if they don't have access to save things to, are they able to run things from inside of a C drive system 32 or C drive xfile 64, or sorry, C drive Windows System 32, or C drive Windows xfile 64 folder. So the 32-bit version of that same executable for live off the land binaries and scripts. Are we going to allow all this to happen? The adversaries have two options. They can abuse what's there, or they can bring their own malicious code. And so if we cut out their ability to bring their own malicious code through application allow listing, defining that list of known good software that we are going to allow to run in our environment so that we're blocking the bad things, which is easier for you to have an infinitely growing list of bad things that we're going to stop, or to have a control list of known good things that we're going to allow in our environment. And this is where application allow listing is centered. And we have access to this as of Windows 10, I believe 1809, so a long time ago in Windows 10 land, from Windows Professional and above. So we don't even need Enterprise Edition anymore to be able to run application allow listing. This is powerful. And we don't have to start across our entire business. We can start in a department. We can focus group policy around a specific groups of people, whether it be our test users or a pre-adoption group, or maybe it's accounts payable. Maybe it's just one specific department within your organization. Set it in audit mode, identify what has been running over the course of a period of time, make sure that that's legitimate, and enforce these rules, and make sure that nothing new outside of that list can operate in your environment. And so suddenly when your accounts payable starts getting phishing emails for, hey, open this attachment, run this, well, scripts, executables, binaries, anything on the system that's not predefined as being authorized by you or an admin just doesn't run. It just is blocked. It's just cut off at the knees, and no more malicious attack chain type steps are occurring. We've stopped it. It has been put aside. It is no longer a concern for us. And we also have things that are built into the environment. So we have two locations of primary concern for us. So we have the C drive Windows System 32, and then we have the C drive sysfile 64 folder. So this is a little bit counterintuitive when we start talking about 64-bit systems. So x64 inside of Windows system or Windows 10 or Windows 11. The System32 folder is actually the 64-bit version of the executable. The syswow 64 folder contains the 32-bit versions. We need to be watching both of these. You can execute things out of both of these. And so we have known lists of things that can be abused inside of our environments. The live off the land binaries and scripts GitHub project is a very, very, very valuable resource around current research around how we can abuse things like MS Build or CertUtil or other things that can be used to stage things or download things or execute things or do things in a way that weren't originally designed inside of our system. So if we're not looking at these items as part of our application allow listing strategy, we're opening up a giant can of worms to try and sort out what an adversary is doing. Let's just take away the options that don't need to be there for our people. When I think of just generically grouping people within the environment into two just overly broad groups, we want to separate the IT persons versus the not IT people. When we start looking at what the adversary is doing through log files and through detections, an adversary is, as part of that post exploit discovery commands, they're trying to get the lay of the land. They're trying to get situational awareness, and so they're looking at things like system info or netstat or hostname or net time or running ipconfig or net view all or net2 or net one share or who am I or all of these things that give them access and understanding to what your environment looks like and how they can proceed in your environment. But if we start watching those things from the logging perspective, that looks a lot like an IT person trying to do troubleshooting inside of your environment. Does that line up with what a business user or a normal operations user inside of your environment would actually be doing? Most of the time, it doesn't. So if we can identify through application allow listing or through logging, all of these post-exploit discovery commands, the situational awareness type items, if we blocked the live off the land binaries and scripts, well, we have a huge advantage from our side. Suddenly, we're forcing that decision point for our adversary. We're forcing them to be perfect every single time. This change doesn't need to be hard. These are known things. And, as far as reducing that attack surface with application allow listing, with hardening the identity, with making sure we're taking away these gimmies, we're reducing that adversarial space that the adversary has to operate. We're taking away things that they are depending on to carry out their attack. And as we're taking them away, we don't have to just take them away. We can use them for triggers, for response, for incident response activities, for initiating the next stage of detection, for throwing alerts, for doing whatever we want. I mean, this doesn't have to be just about preventing. This can also lead into better detections and better response. Even the most elite adversary has to execute something, whether they bring their own code or they're operating on what's already there. And that something has to execute in the context of an identity. So is it normal for this user to be able to do or to be doing IT things? In my mind, when we start having business users doing IT types of things like these discovery commands or these live off the land commands, it means one of two things. Either they're broke, they're troubleshooting, they're trying to get back and being productive again, and we have opportunities to get them being productive sooner rather than later, or the adversary has taken control over their identity and they're really in that post-exploit phase. The adversary's in, they're doing things, and it's a race condition now. We get the opportunity to disrupt that attack. We get the opportunity to get them before that disaster moment occurs. And so what are we going to do when we start watching for the right things? Application allow listing done really, really well can feel like you just visited the cave of forbidden mystery. Like this is the most amazing thing that you can have in your environment working well. It can also be a disaster, but preventing that disaster for you comes from a logical rollout of it, doing that initial audit of what's running, having clear defined procedures for rolling out application allow listing, going slow, doing department by department. I guarantee if you try and roll this company wide in one shot, it's going to end up horribly. You're going to have things going down in flames. You may even create a situation where you get to look for a new job. This is something to tread lightly, but as you roll out, this is going to be extremely effective in helping reduce your attack surface. Networking. Let's talk seriously about conversations on conversations. So when we start looking at those different authentication domains, we talked about how do we isolate what types of users should be able to log in where, and enforcing those rules in that context within our environment. Well, let's keep track of service accounts. Let's keep track of our workstation admins, our server admins, our domain admins, but also all of our users. When we start talking about securing environments through the Windows firewall, we can operate this through group policy. We can do this through Intune policies. We can control this centrally, and we can enforce these logical communication rules. Adversaries have to be able to communicate, whether it's internal or back over to C2. Um, you know, painful lessons around incident response go away very, very slowly. Thinking of walking through lateral movement and identifying bad actors inside of environments, if they can reach a port and there's a service associated with that port, they can abuse it. And so we need to limit access. Certain things over the network side of things from a Windows firewall are really, really hard. You're just not going to do them very well. C2 detection is hard through Windows Defender firewall. Data exfil is really, really hard through Windows Defender firewall. You're not going to win on those two different phases of the attack chain through host-based firewalls. Black Hills Infosec has RETA and active countermeasures and other ways of doing that I would recommend. But overall, those two phases of the attack are really, really hard. But what's less hard is limiting options for your adversaries to move laterally within your environment. Microsoft Windows networks rely on very specific things for normal operations and systems management, and these are all open by default. So things like TCP 135, so remote RPC, NetBIOS over TCP, so file sharing before SMB or the early versions of file sharing, TCP 445, again, file sharing, 3389, RDP, PS remoting, TCP 59, 85, and 86, WMI, so DCOM, RPC, SMB, RDP, PS remoting, WMI, all of these things are how Windows systems talk to each other. But so here's another default that I often see inside of legacy environments. So Windows Defender Firewall is turned on for blocking everything inbound by default. Well, what do we do through trial and error in a lot of environments and inherited environments? Well, through trial and error, through troubleshooting why something isn't going to work, we turn off the Windows firewall, and through one try and no error, now everything works, and we don't have to worry about it. Everything's fixed, everything works. But we just left ourselves wide open. So first of all, do workstations need to talk to other workstations in your environment? Do workstations even need to talk to servers in your environment? Do servers need to talk to other servers? And do servers need to talk to the internet? And depending on what you say to all those questions, do your workstations need the ability to do DCOM, RPC, SMB, RDP, PS remoting, WMI to your servers? So if workstations can no longer talk to workstations, and we have not even implemented a full comprehensive firewall policy on our servers, but we've just filtered out these 6 or 7 ports on who can access them. Suddenly, lateral movement tools don't work. You can't create and spawn and create services to connect to on remote endpoints in your server VLAN. You can't elevate or abuse RPC calls. You can't move through DCOM. Suddenly, WMI only works locally. You've limited the ability for the adversary to move laterally within your environment. I think that's a really, really good thing. We should have more conversations around how do we limit access to these 7 different things inside of our environments. And then we can also do this in the context of identity. So Windows Firewall allows us to do connection security rules. So we can assign inbound security rules to specific users. So we can stop service accounts from connecting to remote devices that they don't need to. We can stop admin accounts from being able to use specific protocols. We can stop user accounts from doing certain things against other destinations. We can use this to our advantage. Should service accounts be able to escape a single laptop or a single workstation? Well, in some cases, they shouldn't be. Should uh, should other servers be able to do WMI calls to other servers? I think these are important questions to be asking. And we can do this in the context of identity on over the network. We also have the ability to look at our live off the land binaries and scripts. Maybe we need to be able to run certain things locally because that's what our users need to support. But do we need to let those binaries and scripts that are built into C Drive Windows System 32 or the 64-bit folder escape from our system? So we can do outbound firewall blocking against all of these things and stop them in their tracks, or we can assign them to an identity-based role. Maybe a normal user should be able to do that, but maybe an admin user should be able to run binaries and scripts that are locally inside of C Drive Windows System 32 and have them escape the environment. Again, we can do this in the context of identity. I think that's really, really important to be keeping in mind. And as our adventure and the Windows firewall continues, the default logging inside of the built-in firewall sucks. You're going to get a bunch of just essentially drop, allow, TCP, UDP, source IP, destination IP, size, TCP flags, send, receive. Like that sucks from a troubleshooting, from a sysadmin perspective. But what we can do is enable audit policies in order to allow the Windows filtering platform to give us more information in the event logs. We can actually get what process tried to do that connection through the Windows firewall. So we can start troubleshooting. We can start limiting this down to what binaries are allowed to make connections, what identities are allowed to make connections, and should they be making connections internal to our network? Should they be making connections out to the internet? We can start really fine tuning all of this stuff. And we have the ability through application allow listing to enforce where those binaries are executing from. So if somebody copies something out of that C Drive Windows System 32 folder directly out to their user profile directory so that they can manipulate it and run it from a different location that maybe isn't monitored. Well, application allow listing policies aren't going to allow that. You can't execute that from an alternate location. And so we can be very prescriptive. So we can make sure that our firewall rules are going to work the way we intend because they're only being allowed to execute from a specific location. All right, here's the audit settings. You can run this from the command line, but you can also set this through group policy. And really, we want to just enable this audit setting. This is what allows us to get actual logging inside of the Windows event viewer. Backing up the slide. This event property 5157 inside of the audit log inside of just regular Windows event viewer. It gives us the ability to get that detailed information, the process information, process ID. It allows us to get it in a much more usable format. So how to become the adversary that is that protected environment that's so frustrating that pen testers tell story about the environment that they were working against, that the adversaries know that it's going to be a disaster if they try to run default attacks against you. How do you get yourself at the bottom of the list of targets where there's much softer targets than you that can be more easily monetized? Go to the end of the list of the attack. You may not get off the list, but how do you go to the end of the list? Confidence is knowing that you will figure it out, not knowing all the answers. And I expand this to mean that we create our systems in a way that we're enforcing what we know so we can react to those outliers. If we have positive control over identity, over communication, over process execution, and only allowing the known good, we're effectively allowing ourselves to protect less. We're focused in on less stuff to watch, less stuff to protect. We can focus in on those outliers. And I know we're coming up to time, Daniel. I think, when we start talking about what's next, reducing that attack surface so we can start focusing on less stuff, then we get to start talking about some of the really, really cool stuff beyond the basics. So automated attack disruption, automation and hardening, and getting into actual logging and detection and response, and doing things like baseline health monitoring. Like, if we get an incident, have we actually verified that the AMSI hasn't been unhooked, or that our EDR still is sending telemetry up to the cloud? Like, validation that our controls are still working the way that we expect them to be working, doing that first triage of IR collection of information. And then I know one of BHIS's favorite topics is deception. We didn't get into any deception, but a lot of this, well, not a lot of this all becomes more effective if we've already enforced what we know to be true across our environment. We get to start focusing in on making all this stuff much more scalable and better and easier to do inside of our environment.
I think people are really enjoying this meme, by the way. And it is fun. And I love what you said, because you're absolutely right. BHIS loves the idea of deception. We think that that is just so much fun. I really enjoyed your thought process of basically becoming the Baba Yaga to to the attackers of, this is the nightmare scenario that I've just found myself in. I hate this environment. I can't do anything. The fact that I even found myself here is blowing my mind. And now, even though that I am here, I can't do nothing because there's a tripwire on every stinking thing. They've put broken glass everywhere, and thumbtacks and jingle bells, and everything's got an alert on it. Everything's locked down. Nothing is easily found or maneuvered or manipulated. And that's really what it boils down to is defaults are the devil, right?
Yeah.
Find all the little things that you can twist for security and turn the wick up as much as you possibly can. Get detections squared away, and that seems to be a bit of an art as much of a science,
Yep.
right? But you gotta figure your environment out so that you can be alerted to the fact that these things are working and doing as they say. And of course, you got to test that.
Yep.
So there's a lot involved going on with this, but if you create that environment, like you say, you're going to find yourself at the bottom of the, hey, let's hack them list,
Yep.
because
I
they
mean,
just don't want the hassle.
full control over what can run in your environment, where it can talk to, and who can do the things. I think that's the ideal situation that we all want to find ourselves in. And they're basics. These are things that are included for free. And we have the ability to do this and manage it centrally for our benefit.
Exactly. And I love that, right? There's so many things that are built into the systems that you can use. They're just waiting for you. We're not even talking about third-party bolt-ons here. We're talking about built within the system that you're probably already running. You have
And
the ability to do some of this stuff.
and absolutely do EDR, do email filtering, do password policies. Don't do bad passwords. Do all the things. Manage browser plugins. Like, don't stop. Do all the things. But I think some of these basics get overlooked.
Agreed. And that's a shame. I would love to do a study on why that is, and what are the main roadblocks to keeping that from happening. Is it lack of training? Is it lack of time? Is it both? Is it something else? I'm sure there's many different ways. That could be a webinar all in and of itself. Maybe
I think
somebody will do that study.
you could compare it against flossing, right? We know we should
Yeah.
do it. How many people do it?
Guilty. Guilty, guilty. That said, it looks like we are at time. Thank you, Discord community, for making our talk so much fun every single time. Discord, what would we do without you? I'll be honest with you. You're so much fun, and we appreciate you joining us today. But now, for those that have joined us on Zoom, it is your time to shine where you get to ask your questions. We are going to jump into the backstage area. So if you look down at the bottom of your Zoom screen, there should be a more button. And then eventually you'll see this thing that says breakout rooms. And in there, you'll be able to hit the anti-siphon AMA room, and that's where we're going to go. And Kyle is going to actually spend a little bit more time with us answering your questions. You can even turn your camera on if you're so inclined, as well as your microphone, and ask visually and verbally if you feel so comfortable. If not, by all means, throw it into our chat there. Again, thank you, Discord, for joining us. We'll see you next week. We're going to go ahead and grab out into that breakout room, and we'll see you there, Zoom kids, and everybody else. Have a great weekend.